Hello everyone and welcome to Aero Innovations. I'm Aero, your AI host. With the help of our new editor, we've been able to catch up on some of our backlog. If this keeps up, I might soon be able to showcase every single session I play, including all the boring ones, and maybe even many of the sessions where I lose, if you're into that sort of thing. I jumped the gun early for August in vlog number 8 because I really wanted to feature the hand where I snap called my opponent's all-in shove on the river with second pair after calling a $300 turn bet. This session takes place the very next day. As usual, we're playing 2-5 no limit hold'em at the Wynn Encore in Las Vegas, where I bind for $1,500, which is 300 big blinds. It's Friday, August 9th. I start at 1:31 in the morning. 12 minutes into the session, we play our first notable hand. The middle position opens to 15. The low jack calls. I 3-bet in the hijack to 75 with ace-king of diamonds. Everyone else folds, but both of my opponents call. We go 3-handed in position to a flop of 4, 4, 9, rainbow. We don't have anything at all except 2 overs and a backdoor flush draw. However, we have something extremely mighty known as position. Both opponents check the action over to me. This board is extremely dry and polarizing. It will miss all suited connector type of hands, and we're ahead of most of the ace-x type of hands. There's a very good chance we have the best hand here, and if not, we fully plan to utilize any scare cards on future streets. I see bet on most low paired boards like this, especially in position, because it greatly reduces the chance that anyone flopped anything. So here I see bet to a hearty 40% bet of $100. This is the same amount I would choose if I had an actual hand like tens or jacks. Thankfully, both of our opponents fold, so we start the session off right with some delicious dead money. For this next hand, it's been a good 40 minutes since our last notable hand. We've lost back most of the profit we gained, which tends to happen when you don't get anything to play or play small hands that completely miss the flop. Here, the +1 opens for 15. The middle position and low jack both call before the cutoff 3-bets to 65 with about 600 behind. I'm in the big blind with ace-king of hearts. There's already over $100 of trapped money out there. I also don't mind getting it all in against the cutoff for his remaining stack. I don't want to make a milky raise here and be forced to play out of position for the rest of the hand, especially when I should mathematically break 2 out of 3 flops, so I choose a bet sizing that should force the cutoff to put his whole stack in if he wants to play. I cold 4-bet to 275. I suppose 225 would have worked fine too. The cutoff could be 3-betting any number of hands in his position, ranging from weak-suited connectors to a middling pocket pair, none of which will be happy to see my huge raise. You don't want to square off against a hand like 9s or 10s when you're out of position with an unmade hand like ace-king if you price him in with a raise like 150 or so. Thankfully, my ploy works and everyone folds, so we pick up more dead money. 35 minutes later, there's a live 10. I open in the +1 to 35 with king-jack of hearts. Only the big blind and straddle call. The flop comes 2, 6, 7 with 2 hearts and 1 diamond. Both opponents check to me. This is a beautiful flop. I'm a huge fan. We have 2 overs with the second nut flush draw. We're mathematically ahead of all 1-pair holdings all the way up to pocket 10s here. I start with a half pot c-bet of 50, and both of my opponents call. The turn is just pure perfection. It's the ace of hearts.
Nice.
We make the absolute nuts. Unfortunately, both opponents check to me again. I don't want to bet too big here because that ace alone is enough to scare off most of the competition. I want to keep in all of their dead draws, so I put out a very deceptive 30% pot bet of 75. The big blind makes the call before the straddle suddenly check raises to a massive $300 with a 3K stack. Decision time. I go into the tank for almost a full minute. We know the straddle undoubtedly has a flush here. We're holding the stone cold Steve Austin nuts. Once I make this call, I'll have about 1100 behind. I have 2 options. Since I'm in position, I can either smooth call and pray the river doesn't pair the board, or put out another heart, which should happen 2/3 of the time safely, or I can shove all in. I know that the big blind is very loose, so he's almost certainly drawing dead. If I suspected he had any outs whatsoever with 2 pairs or a set, I would just shove here. So the question is, does the straddle have a high enough flush to withstand an all-in shove? I'm holding both the king and the jack, so that only leaves the queen and a bunch of smaller flushes. We cannot lose this hand. If the river is clean, we're guaranteed a full double up. If the river is not clean, we're still going to win the hand, but we'll almost certainly lose some value. Eventually, I decide to just call, hoping maybe to keep the big blind in as well. Unfortunately, he makes the laydown. The river is an unsightly deuce of clubs, pairing the board. My opponent properly checks, making me a very sad bear. I shoot out a bet of 600, and he makes the crying call. I table my hand, and he says he had the queen-high flush, so we lose out on about $500 of missed value. I think that most opponents would just bet this river anyways, regardless of the fact that the board paired. So I think against another opponent, I would have gotten my full double up anyways. So that leads me to believe that my call on the turn was a better move than a shove in most situations. This particular run out against this particular opponent just ended up being unfortunate. One orbit later, +1 opens to 15 with about an $800 stack. I 3-bet with a pair of interracial thespians to 65 in the hijack. The button cold calls with a $1,700 stack. The +1, who is the loose third wheel from our last hand, makes the call as well. The flop is about as good as it gets without flopping a set. It's Jack, 4, 6, rainbow. The problem with these kinds of dry boards is you really have to wonder what sorts of hands your opponents choose to continue with. When the +1 checks to me, I put in a 40% c-bet to 80. If the flop had been more connected, like with two suits that match, I would likely have sized up to about 150. The button plays with her chips for a while before deciding to flat call. It looked like she was intending to raise there. I'm pretty unnerved. I think I would have been more comfortable with a raise on a dry board like this. It would indicate a one-pair type holding, whereas now I'm concerned she might be slow playing a set. The +1 tags along as well, but he can have anything. He's a complete calling station. The turn brings in an unsightly king of clubs, putting 2 clubs on board. +1 checks. I decide to check back for pot control. Suddenly, the button throws out a toe-curling bet of 300. +1 quickly gets out of the way. What sort of value hands am I beating here that would bet this large? That sort of bet seems like a set that's afraid of the backdoor flush draw to me. I suppose I'm beating 10-Jack and Jack-Queen of clubs, betting huge as a semi-bluff. With how this hand has played out, I could very easily have Ace-King here, or even pocket kings. So with that sort of bet, she'd just be value-owning herself. I'm not invested a whole lot, so I decide to let this one go. What do you guys think of my fold here? Would you guys have played this hand any differently? Please pause the video for a moment and let me know in the comments. I asked my opponent what she had at the end of this hand. She was very nice enough to let me know that she did have the goods. She said she had a monster. She said she had Ace-Jack. Wah, wah, wah. Mother, father. She legitimately thought she was making a value bet there. I don't understand what she expects to call her for a $300 bet that she has beat. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because I'm only going to come out twisted like a pretzel. Let's just chalk this hand up to another example of boars rolling in the mud. With this small loss, we're still up $1,057 after only 1 hour and 30 minutes into our session. 10 minutes later, we've lost some players, so we're down to 6-handed. Under the gun limps. +1 opens to 25. He's the opponent we beat earlier with flush over flush. I call in the middle position with 10-Jack of clubs. We go 3-handed to a flop of queen, 10, deuce, rainbow. We flop middle pair with a backdoor straight draw. The action checks over to us. We have middle pair, but our kicker is nothing to write home about. We may or may not have the best hand here. If I were to bet, it'd be a strong bet of like 60. You never want to show weakness or telegraph the strength of your hand. Instead, I elect to check. The turn is a 3 of hearts, putting 2 hearts on board. The action checks over to us for a second time. Okay, I think I have the best hand now. I should bet here between 60 to 75 to charge an expensive price for all the draws, regardless of the fact that we only have middle pair. But, looking back at my notes for this day and checking out the video footage, I see a bet of 30. I have no idea why. I think I was sniffing too much butt crack that day. Maybe I walked by a building with fresh paint.
Have you been drinking paint? No.
Regardless, I'm staring at this $30 bet in front of me, thinking to myself, wow, what a ridiculously weak bet. Under the gun folds, but the +1, who is the original raiser, makes the call, after some noticeable contemplation. I don't think he was considering raising. I think he was legitimately considering folding. The river is a jack of spades. If I was worried about my kicker, I don't need to worry anymore. I just made middle 2 pairs. Our opponent checks over to us for a third time. Okay, so we know he definitely doesn't have a queen. A 10 with a bigger kicker is about the only type of hand we can try to get value from, but I don't think such a hand would have taken so long to call in the turn. Such a hand would actually lead. Whatever glue or paint I had sniffed getting to this point was still affecting my brain. I can't get any value out of a missed flush or straight draw unless he had a hand like King-Jack. Actually, that's about the only hand I can get value from. This river should actually be just a check, or a tiny bet of like third pot. You should only bet huge on this sort of river if you're nutted with a hand like Ace-King, in which case an overbet here is the most appropriate. If your opponent missed their draws, they won't even call if you breathed into the pot. So if you had a hand like Ace-King that played it meekly and somehow arrived to this river, you're targeting hands like Jack-Queen or 10-Jack. Really strong hands. With my current holding, a check or a small bet is more appropriate. Instead, for whatever reason, I chose to go with a huge bet here, targeting myself for a kill shot.
Stop it. Get some help.
I throw out an unnecessary 70% pot bet of 100. Oh, you know what it is? I just figured it out. I was probably still rattled by that ace-jack play against my queens. I still haven't had enough time to recoup mentally from that hand yet. This is why I suggest taking a modest break when a zombie sticks his pecker into your skull. It wasn't for a very big loss, but even a light jab can knock you off your balance and line you up for the haymaker that comes next. My opponent accepts my invitation to knock me the F out with a check raise to 400, repping exactly one hand. This should be an easy fold here. In no world does he not have exactly ace-king after he check raises my massive river bet. But this is a good example of how even a professional can make bad decisions when they're rattled. I found myself unable to make the fold after my hand had improved, so I make the crying call after some contemplation. And of course, my opponent shows ace-king for the rivered nuts. That's why he contemplated folding on the turn. He had a gut shot draw on a double heart board, but he was given an extremely good price. With this loss, I'm only up $598. Thankfully, I'm able to pull my head out of the gutter. The best fighters can recover even after taking a pounding and come back to claim victory. Yes, I completely butchered this hand. I admit that. A good exercise for you when you're trying to improve your game is to count your number of mistakes each night. First, you have to recognize them. Don't be too prideful. Admit your mistakes, at least to yourself. Once you recognize your leaks, you can slowly start to plug them. Work on reducing the number of mistakes you make each session. You'll notice from my vlogs that I don't make too many mistakes. I am human after all, so they do happen occasionally, but try to assess your own mental state after each one of these occurrences to check if you're still okay to continue playing. If not, just go home and come back another day. The casinos are open 24/7, or at least they are in Vegas. 25 minutes later, we play this next hand. We're down to only 4-handed here. Under the gun opens to 15. It folds to me in the small blind. Since we're so short, I have a good candidate to 3-bet with, although I hate that I'm doing it out of position. Still, beggars can't be picky, so I put in the 3-bet to 50 with pocket 9s. My opponent calls, so we go heads up out of position to a flop of ace, 3-5 with 2 diamonds. Don't be fooled. This isn't a terrible flop. There's only one overcard in a heads up short-handed hand. An ace is actually more likely to be in my range than in his, since he can literally open raise with almost anything from small pocket pairs to suited connectors. So I start with a down bet to 35. My opponent makes the call, which isn't telling at all. The turn is an 8 of clubs. I slow down and check here for pot control. Plus, this isn't exactly the sort of flop I can expect to get 3 streets of value from with my current hand holding. I still plan on calling any mid-sized bet. I'm beating lots of draws, like the front door flush draw or a straight draw with a hand like 4-6 suited. Thankfully, the action gets checked around. The river is as beautiful as it gets without being a 9. It's another ace, greatly reducing the probability that my opponent is holding one, and making it apparent that it's much less likely that I'm holding one either. This is a great card for me to squeeze some value from. I lead for a 40% pot bet of 75. My opponent quickly makes the call. I show, and my 9s are good. This was a great confidence booster and affirmation that my head is back in the game. It wasn't for a huge win, but it showed that I was still capable of properly squeezing value when appropriate. Shortly after that last hand, we've gained another player, so we're 5-handed here. Under the gun opens to 20. I 3-bet to 75 on the button with ace-king offsuit. It's a great hand in a great position, so this situation is ideal. Only the original raiser calls. The flop is ace, 7, deuce, rainbow. Our opponent checks. There's not a whole lot to be afraid of here. This is actually a really good looking flop if I do say so myself. So I start with a down bet to 55, which I typically do in a heads up hand in position, regardless of whether I'm actually holding the ace or not. My opponent realizes this and makes the call. The turn is a board pairing 7 of diamonds, which also puts 2 diamonds on board. I'm not a fan of this card at all. It's very possible my opponent could be holding a 7 here with a hand like 7-8 suited. So when my opponent checks, I could go either way here between checking the action back for pot control or betting. I think I'm probably split evenly between the two decisions. Here, I decide on a modest bet of 100. I'm going to proceed very cautiously if my opponent decides to check raise, but thankfully he makes the fold, so we pick up another modest win. Only a few minutes later, under the gun opens to 15. The +1 calls. I only flat call since I'm out of position in the big blind, but had I been in position, I would have 3-bet with my king-queen offsuit here, especially since we're still so short-handed. The flop comes queen, 9, 7, rainbow. I start with a check to find out the strength of my hand. The original raiser under the gun leads for 50, a full 100% pot bet. The +1 folds. This is a really strong bet. I'm worried I'm up against ace-queen here, but I'm not about to fold my hand to a single bet, so I make the call. The turn is a 3 of hearts, changing nothing. I check again. My opponent has no intention of slowing down and slams another pot-sized bet of 125 to my face. Again, I'm not completely sure that I'm good here, but we're still only 5-handed, so I can't exactly fold either, so I make the call. If I could think of one card I would love to see on the river, this would be it. It's a king of spades.
Yeah, boy.
Now, if the original raiser had flopped 2 pairs with some sort of suited combination, we're about to wreck his world. Since we're out of position, I don't want to check here only to have the action checked back. So I lead with a full 100% pot bet of 400, targeting hands like pocket aces or any combination of flop 2 pairs. I'm losing to 10 jack, but our opponent is more of a calling station than the sort to bet strong on 2 streets with only a naked draw. Earlier, he called a $30 pre-flop raise out of position with queen 6 suited. So here, he tanks for a while. I'm really hoping for a call. This would be a great card to bluff on if I'm holding a hand like 8-10 that missed the open-ender. I could represent 10-jack or just a naked king, hence why I chose the bet sizing that I did. Calling stations have a really hard time folding. Sadly, he does decide to eventually lay his hand down, claiming that he had ace-queen. Still, this allows us to bounce back into the positive for $1,070, putting us in the green for a respectable amount only 2 hours and 15 minutes into the session. Nearly an hour passes as we steadily climb with small wins leading to this next hand. We're 6-handed for this one. I open to 20 in the hijack with ace-jack offsuit. Both the blinds call. The flop comes ace, 9, 2 with 2 hearts and 1 club. Both opponents check to me. Since we're multi-way, I start with a larger than normal c-bet of 45 into the $60 pot. Both opponents call. The turn is a 5 of hearts, which is most definitely not a card I wanted to see. Still, we're only 6-handed, and I'm a greedy bastard. I'm drawing dead to a flush, so when both opponents check to me, I figure it's cheaper to find out now rather than check this back and face a potentially large river bet. So I put in a tiny quarter pot bet of 50. The small blind folds, but the big blind calls. Okay, good. I think we can definitely rule out a flush. That tiny bet was designed to entice a flush to come out of the woodworks. Every bet you make at every price point should be made with intention. Never randomly just pick a number out of your hat, or bunghole for that matter. All of your bets should be designed to either gain information or extract maximum value. The river is a 7 of clubs. My opponent checks to me for a 3rd time. I go in for a milky 3rd pot bet of 100, and he makes the call. I table my hand, and it's good. My opponent shows ace-10. Being profitable in poker isn't about getting lucky or making massive hands. Everyone takes turns getting lucky. Everyone takes turns being dealt a massive hand. I haven't been sun running for nearly 17 years as a poker pro. That's just ridiculous and ludicrous to even think about. Being profitable in poker is about knowing how to make the maximum with a marginally stronger hand than your opponents, and knowing how to lose the minimum when you're the one that's behind. Keep your mind strong. Don't get married to overpairs, etc. Stuff like that. Take in every cue your opponents give from their bet sizes, how fast they call, the way their eyes or hands move towards their chips, and the way they've been playing throughout the night to come to a proper assessment of what they're possibly holding. That's how you win at poker. With this sizable win, we're up $1,484, 3 hours and 10 minutes into our session. I play for another 10 minutes before deciding to cash out. In for $1,500 and out for $2,899 for a respectable win of $1,399 after 3 hours and 21 minutes of playtime. This was only the 3rd session I played in August, but it was definitely a great way to start the month, especially after such a mediocre July. If you like what you saw today, please like this video. It only takes a quick second, but it helps more than you know. In fact, it'll likely help my channel grow. Subscribe to my channel for more tips and tricks on how to crush low-stakes poker. If you're interested, I also offer personal one-on-one coaching either in person or via video call. You can find out more details over on my Patreon, where you can also find more of my coaching series. October will feature a brand new Acolyte. I'm anxious to see how I can turn this new Acolyte around. As to the last cash drawing for September, unless I messed up again, I believe the winner is Sean Valken with his guess of 937. Please reach out to me to claim your prize. I have an extremely large video coming up next where I'll post highlights from my first profitable session with the team from the Absolute Nuts. It'll be the first of my vlogs where you can see me from a 3D perspective. I'll announce the grand prize winner in that video, so stay tuned. And as always, I hope to see you in the next video.